Welcome! In this series of videos, we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look to develop a code library query utility using the PowerBasic Windows compiler and the MLG custom grid. Before you start coding an application, there first has to be the idea for an application. This could be a utility that you think will save you time or effort, or could be to meet a user's needs. What we are going to look at here is a practical application of the MLG Lite code we created in a previous video. To save time, I've already built the skeleton of the application. But first, let's cover the idea for the application. We have, over the past couple of years, produced a fair number of code libraries. These contain useful code that appears in many projects and saves development time. The mantra of code once, use many times is a good one to remember. However, with so many libraries, it can sometimes be difficult to remember if there is a routine that will already do what you want to do or is close enough in functionality to act as a basis for some new routine. What this project will do is to scan these code libraries and pull out the names of each routine with their description and add them to the grid control. So in this new application, we have two things on screen. We have a toolbar which has two buttons, a Load Libraries button and a Help button. Below that, we have an MLG grid with 5 columns. The intention is to pull the data out of our library files and position it within this grid. First column to contain the type of the routine. Is it a subroutine? Is it a function? Or is it a macro? The second column will contain the name of the routine. The third column will contain the line number within the library file that the routine begins at. The library column will contain the name of the library in which the routine has been discovered. And on the assumption that each routine will have a commented description line, we're going to populate the text of that in the description field. So let's have a look at the code. In our skeleton, we have a number of libraries being referenced. The standard Windows API and Common Control Library, and of course the PB Forms library. Additionally, we're bringing in the MyLittle Static Link library and its associated include file. And of our own libraries, we're using the MLG Lite utilities, the File Handling Routines library, and I've copied the toolbar library from its position within the main libraries folder into the root of this project. The reason for that is I've made some changes to that library just for this. If we have a look at the toolbars library, we will see I have changed the name of the second button to be Load. I've left the other buttons as they are, and in the routine that actually creates the toolbar, once it's actually been created, I am effectively disabling and hiding each of the buttons that I don't require on the toolbar. So we're hiding the Add button and we're hiding the Reports button, so that when our code runs, we only see the two buttons we actually want, the Load Libraries and the Help. Since you could have multiple sets of libraries on your computer, I added the Load Libraries button so you can select a folder that contains the libraries. So if we look at the callback function of a dialog, the event handler, to see how that's going to be called. In our event handler, we will have an event that handles the clicking on the ID Load button on the toolbar. And what we want the application to do in here is to allow the user to browse for the folder to select. So I've set the flags for this to be no new folder button. We don't want the user creating any new folders, we want them selecting one that already exists. and we're going to use the display browse command to allow the user to select the folder which we're going to search. So we'll set the initial folder to be the path the executable actually sits within. And should the user actually select a folder, the name of that folder will be stored in the str folder variable. So all we need to do next is to test to see if that has been populated, and we will call a new function whose job it is to load our libraries and search through them. So we'll call this new function load libraries. We'll pass it two parameters, the folder the user has selected and the grid handle, since we're going to be putting this information into the grid. And we will create a stub for our new function, passing the two parameters, the str folder and the grid handle. We'll come back to this one in a moment, but I want to look at the main part of the dialog where we're setting up the grid. We're setting up 5 columns wide enough for the information we think that's going to be displayed in them. Now for the type, routine, line and library, they will all quite happily sit on a single line. However, the description may be quite long and may exceed the space we've got available. So one thing we can do with the MLG grid is to make each row slightly taller. So in the main dialog, we're setting up the basic parameters and configuration of our grid. We can change the row height either in here or in the initialize dialog. So let's change it in the initialize dialog. In here we're going to first get the number of rows in the grid using one of the functions within our MyLittleGrid Lite library. And then for each of those rows we're going to call the setRowHeight function, passing it 3 parameters, the grid handle, the row we wish to amend, and the number of pixels in height we want that row to be. If we run our application now, we'll see that each row has been amended in height. So this should give us enough room in the description column for 3 rows. So let's go back to our load libraries. If we have a look at the files within our libraries folder, we'll see that all the files have an INC extension. They are all include files. So we want to search for every file with that extension within this folder. And we know we have 3 different types of functions in these libraries. We have functions themselves, we have subroutines, and we have macros. So if we have a look in Notepad to see what the text generally looks like, our functions begin with the word function. And somewhere underneath that is a description of what the function actually does. So this is the information we want to pull out of the file. So we're going to be needing some local variables in here. We're going to set up a couple of arrays, one to keep track of the library files and one to keep track of file details. Our first task is to use the $$ command. It can be quite easily used to sweep through a folder looking for matches. So we populate the str file name variable using the $$ command. We've already passed in the folder which contains our libraries, and we're looking for everything with an INC extension. And this is being sent to this array. And this array has been set up as a $data array, containing all the information on each of the files. Within this function, we're only going to be interested in the name of the file. But this could be extended to look for things like the last updated time or the created time. So while this file name is not empty, and the long X in this case is less than the maximum number of library files we're geared up to handle, I've set this to be 2000, but we can increase this if needed. And it will then store the value in str file name for the next one. It will iterate around this loop until all the files have been found. The str libraries array now holds a list of all the files. And we're going to use a for next loop to step through each file one at a time, picking up the name of the file from our libraries array using the element of file name. And we're going to be using one of the libraries in our file handling routines. They read the file into an array. It will take all the data within the named file and it will put it into this str file array. This is the content of our library file. And our next task is to look at each row in this array, which is effectively each row in the library file. And we're going to pick up the information in that array and we're going to put it into the str data variable. If the data line we've picked up begins with a comment character, then we can just iterate. We can go on to the next row. Now we have to look for rows which have a function or subroutine or macro. And we're testing for the word function, sub or macro with a space after it. This should allow us to pick up the beginning of the routine. In certain cases, when a function is returning a value, you will do function equals and then the value. So we don't want to pick up those as the beginning of a functional routine, and we'll just look for the equals in the row after equals exists when we'll again iterate. Now we need to pick up the type of the routine and the name. We can do that quite easily using the parse command. We're looking at the data line and we're parsing it on the space character. So the function should have the space after the word function. So this should pick up the type of the routine. The name, we're using the any option within the parse command, which means we're looking for either spaces or open brackets, and we're looking for the second element. This should bring us back the name of our routine. So having determined the name of the routine, we now have to look for a description line, which will be a comment line. However, this may not be on the line immediately following the word function. If there are many parameters on the function line, it's quite common to fold these around so the code looks more readable. So we may be looking a number of lines beyond the function line. So I'm going to work on the assumption that our description could be up to as many as 10 lines beyond the function line. So we're initializing the description variable to be an empty length string. And then for the next 10 lines, we're looking for a description which is starting with a comment character. So if we actually find one of those, we can pick up the description. We're using the trim command to trim off any leading or trailing spaces. Now that we've got this far, we want to increment long count. Long count is being used for a position within the grid. And we're going to be using the prefix command here to save us a little bit of typing. So we're going to make the str_grid array with long count as our element within the array, and we're going to populate the first element with the type, the second with the name, the third with the row inside the file that we have found our routine, then the fourth column with the file name, and the final one with the description. However, since our array we are populating at the moment is a large array, and we only want to show the number of rows in the grid on the screen to the user containing data. So we're going to prepare another grid which is going to be used for our output. And we'll make that exactly of the size of the data. Since we know that long count is the total number of rows we need to prep, we will prep an array based on that. So we'll use a redim command for our str_grid output array. And a simple for next loop that steps through each element and populates that from the str_grid array. This will now give us a grid we can actually use to put directly into the MyLittleGrid control itself. And we can use the inbuilt function for MyLittleGrid called putx. This is the extended version of the put command. It takes a number of parameters, the grid handle, the array containing the information we want to put into the grid, so it's going to populate the entire grid from one array, the -4 option, which is set so that we won't overwrite any headers, and the number 1 for the grid refresh. So let's try running the application now to see how it looks. Now that the application is running, let's try loading our libraries. This allows us to browse for the folder. So we pick our libraries folder and hit the OK button. Well, the information has populated on screen. We have the type of the routine, we have the routine's name, we have the line number inside the library on which this routine actually exists, and we have the description. Although we have the description populated in the cell, long descriptions are being cut off. we need to find a way of actually folding these and wrapping them around so we can see all the data. So after we've actually put the data into the grid, we need to step around each row in our grid and wrap the data. So this will be another for next loop. We're going to use one of the send message commands to set the format override. The send message commands always take 4 parameters. We're using our first parameter to be the handle of the grid. The second parameter is the type of operation we want to perform on the grid, in this case the format override. The next 2 parameters are actually passing more than one piece of information. We're using the make long command to encapsulate both the row number and the column number in one parameter. We're doing the same for the last parameter to encompass the justification type and the word wrap option. So if we run that now and we pick our library, we'll see that the text has now been wrapped round within the cell, so we're no longer losing any data on that line. The last thing on this grid we want to do is to colour alternate rows different colours just for readability. And again, we're going to be using the function colorbank grid rows in our MyLittleGrid light routines. So we run this now and pick our library. The data on the screen is much easier to read. Now I can see from some of the display here that some of my libraries are not very well commented. And I'll take that on as a task to comment my libraries better. The functionality we already had in our template will allow us to sort these columns. We can sort by the type by right-clicking and picking either sort column ascending or descending. We will see from that we have a mere 4 subroutines in our libraries. We have a few macros, but the majority are all functions. Now that we have this information out of the files and into our grid, we can then look at doing searching on it. But we'll leave that for the next video. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.